Imagine you are a titan of industry, a billionaire ruling a New York City empire from a skyscraper of glass and steel. Your world is built on cold, hard logic, on transactions and control. You have everything money can buy, yet you possess nothing that truly matters. You need an heir, a legacy to carry your name. But you refuse the messy complications of love. You don't want a wife. You want a contract. Then one rainy afternoon, you see her. A homeless artist on a city corner with nothing but a sketchbook and a fire of defiance in her eyes. You make her an offer that could save her from poverty, bear your child in exchange for a fortune. A simple, clean transaction. But what happens when the calculated lines of a business deal begin to blur? What happens when two tiny, persistent heartbeats on an ultrasound screen threaten to shatter a lifetime of emotional walls you've built so carefully? Before we dive into this gripping story of power, vulnerability, and unexpected love, please subscribe to stay updated with more powerful stories. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Join us to see what happens when Alexander Sterling's most calculated investment becomes the one thing he can't possibly control. Alexander Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of Wall Street. At 42, his name was a whisper of power in boardrooms, a symbol of ruthless efficiency. His life was a meticulously curated collection of assets. There were the skyscrapers that pierced the Manhattan skyline, the fleet of luxury cars silent and gleaming in their private garage, and the status that commanded respect or fear in every room he entered. But that night something was different. He stood in his penthouse, a silent kingdom overlooking the glittering expanse of Central Park. The city below was a galaxy of lights, a testament to human ambition. His ambition. Yet a profound emptiness echoed in the vast minimalist space. The silence was louder than any shouting match, deeper than any ocean. For all his wealth, for all his power, there was one asset he had failed to acquire. An heir. He needed a child. But the traditional path was a minefield he refused to cross again. 2 marriages, both ending in bitter divorces and ruinously expensive disappointments, had taught him a harsh lesson. Love, he had concluded, was an illusion. It was an emotional liability, a source of endless complications that distracted from the real business of life, building, acquiring, winning. A child, however, was different. A child was an investment, a continuation of the Sterling legacy. It was the ultimate symbol of everything he had built, a living testament to his success. He was determined not to repeat his past mistakes. This time there would be no pretense of a relationship. There would be no messy emotional entanglements to navigate. He needed a clean agreement, a simple binding contract. With his vast resources, he knew he could find someone. Someone willing to carry the pregnancy without questions, without emotional ties, without any claim to his life. For Alexander, this was a transaction. And like all his transactions, he would maintain absolute, unwavering control. Now he just had to find the right candidate. The next morning, Alexander's Aston Martin sliced through the city streets. It was a black arrow against the gray, concrete jungle. His mind, however, was far from the satisfying hum of the engine. It was working, calculating methodically, scanning for someone who would fit the profile. While stopped at a traffic light near downtown, a flash of something out of place snagged his attention. On the corner of the sidewalk, a young woman sat on the ground. She was hunched over a piece of dirty paper, her hand moving with an intense, almost frantic focus. Her brown hair was a messy cascade falling over her face and hiding her from the world. But through the strands, her blue eyes shone with a startling intensity. They were a spark of vibrant life that defied her tired, worn-out appearance. She was utterly invisible to the throngs of people rushing past her. They were a river of suits and briefcases, and she was just a stone on the riverbed. But something about her fierce concentration, her complete absorption in her art, held Alexander's gaze. He tried to dismiss her. She was a distraction, an anomaly. But as the light turned green, he glanced back one last time. Who draws on the sidewalk, he thought, a flicker of annoyance rising in him, as if the entire world doesn't exist. Annoyed with himself for the lapse in focus. He pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, leaving her behind in a plume of exhaust. Yet a few blocks away, the image of her lingered. It was a persistent, unwelcome thought he couldn't shake. He pulled into a parking garage, the sudden quiet amplifying the conflict in his mind. His hands gripped the steering wheel. An idea absurd and yet strangely compelling began to form. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to the empty car. But his gut, the same instinct that guided his billion-dollar deals, pushed him back. It was a feeling he had learned never to ignore. With a sigh of deep reluctance, he turned the car around and drove back to the corner. There she was, unchanged, now leaning the paper against the grimy wall to get a better look at her work. He pulled up to the curb, the tinted window gliding down with a soft, expensive whir. His tone was direct, cold, and accustomed to immediate obedience. It was the voice he used to command boardrooms. "Hey, you! Come here." The young woman looked up. Her eyes, no longer focused on her art, narrowed with instant suspicion. She took in the obscenely expensive car and the impeccably dressed man inside. She did not move. "I'm not asking," he insisted, his tone unyielding. "Now, I don't have all day." Slowly, cautiously, she rose to her feet. As she approached the car, he could see her more clearly. The thinness of her frame, the weariness etched into the lines of her young face. Despite it all, there was a strength in her posture, a stubborn defiance in the way she met his gaze. She was not broken. Not yet. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice low but firm. It held no plea, only a challenge. Alexander studied her for a moment longer before replying. "Get in. I'll take you somewhere we can talk." A dry, humorless laugh escaped her lips. "I'm not one of those," she said, her meaning clear. "If that's what you're thinking." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He was not used to being misjudged. "Don't be absurd. I don't have time for such things. I just want to talk. Now get in the car, or you can go back to living on that sidewalk." The hesitation was still there. He could see a flicker of fear in her eyes, warring with her pride. But the sheer authority in his voice, the cold finality of his ultimatum, left her no room for argument. Finally, she opened the door and slid into the plush leather seat. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing her in. The silence inside the car was thick and heavy. It was a palpable thing. But Alexander seemed unaffected by it. He drove to a quiet, discreet bistro on the Upper East Side, a world away from the downtown noise, and parked. This was his territory, controlled, civilized. "What's your name?" he asked as they sat at a secluded corner table. "Amelia Vance, but everyone calls me Mia," she retorted, her suspicious gaze never leaving his face. "Why does it matter? Because I need to know who I'm dealing with," he said flatly. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Mia, Why do you sit on a sidewalk drawing as if nothing else in the world matters?" She shrugged her eyes, finally drifting away from his intense stare. "What else is there to do? I have nowhere to go. I lost everything. But that's none of your business." He let the silence hang in the air for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes locking onto hers once more. "You're right. Let's get straight to the point. I want to make you an offer, something that can and will change your life." Her eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" He didn't hesitate. He spoke the words, each one carefully chosen, a deliberate, calculated blow. "I want you to have a child for me." Mia blinked. The words hung in the air between them, seeming to warp the very reality of the quiet bistro. She stared at him, searching for any sign of a joke, any hint of madness. She found neither. Only a cold, unwavering seriousness. "You're joking, right?" she finally whispered. "No," he said, his voice level. "It is a serious offer. I will cover all your expenses. I will provide you with full medical support, housing, and anything else you require during the pregnancy. At the end, you will receive a sum of money that will ensure you never have to worry about anything ever again." A nervous, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. She crossed her arms, a futile attempt to shield herself from the sheer absurdity of the situation. "This has to be a joke. What kind of man makes an offer like that to a complete stranger he found on the street? The kind of man who knows what he wants." Alexander replied, his gaze unblinking. "And who doesn't waste time achieving it? I don't want a relationship, Mia. I don't want emotional drama. I just want a child. It is as simple and as complicated as that." Mia stared at him, her mind reeling. His proposal was preposterous, yet the cold, unwavering logic in his eyes told her he was deadly serious. The sheer audacity of it hit her like a physical blow, leaving her torn between her own dignity and the brutal, crushing reality of her life. "This is insane," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "No woman in her right mind would ever agree to something like this." Alexander's expression didn't soften. He did not offer comfort or persuasion. He offered only facts. "No woman in your position would refuse," he countered bluntly. "I am offering you a way out, a complete escape. Comfort, stability, a new life. In exchange for something you already possess, the biological ability to carry a child." Mia's arms tightened around herself. Deep down, his cruel words struck a chord of undeniable truth. Every day was a battle for survival. Every night was a gamble against the cold. Even so, the idea of selling something so intrinsically personal, so sacred, made her stomach churn with a mixture of revulsion and despair. "And then what?" she asked, her voice heavy with skepticism. "What happens after the baby is born?" Alexander relaxed slightly in his chair. He had anticipated this question. He had an answer for everything. "After the baby is born, you will receive the final substantial payment. You will use it to start your life over. There will be no strings attached. You will be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you want. No strings attached." She let out another humorless, bitter laugh. "And how do I know you won't change your mind? How do I know you won't drag me through the courts later?" He studied her carefully, his eyes assessing her intelligence, her fear. "Mia, I am a businessman. I do not enter into agreements without ensuring every legal loophole is closed and all parties are protected. You will have a legally binding contract drafted by the best lawyers in New York. Neither of us will ever be able to alter the terms. Now, let's have a little fun with those who only skim the comments. Type milkshake in the comments below. Only those who have read this far will get the joke. Now back to the story. Mia fell silent. His words, cold and precise, sank in. The promise of security, however transactional it felt, was a powerful lure. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even a safe place to sleep that night. But she was also standing on the precipice of a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of her life and the life of an unborn child. "And what if I say no?" she challenged, leaning forward slightly, mustering her last shred of defiance. Alexander offered a faint, chilling smile. It did not reach his eyes. "Then you go back to the streets. You continue scraping by. You face the cold and the hunger and the invisibility. The choice, Mia, is entirely yours." His words landed like a punch to the gut. She wanted to hate him for his brutal honesty, but she hated the truth in them even more. He had her cornered, and they both knew it. But there was one last thing she had to understand. One piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "A man like you with all your money? Why not adopt or find one of those society women who would love to show off a perfect family?" Alexander took a deep breath. For the first time, his tone lost some of its business-like edge and took on a more serious personal quality. "Because I want an heir of my own blood, my own legacy, and because adopting or getting involved with someone in my social circle brings emotional complications I am not willing to entertain ever again. I want control, Mia. Nothing more, nothing less." The raw, stark coldness in his voice made her look away, unsettled. She knew he was being honest, which only made her feel more exposed, more vulnerable. "I need time to think," she said finally. It was a desperate attempt to regain some small measure of control in a situation where she had none. Alexander nodded, as if this too was part of his calculation. "You have 24 hours. After that, the offer is off the table." He stood. He walked to the door, and then he was gone, disappearing without another word. He left Mia alone in the silent, expensive bistro, feeling as though she was being pulled into a powerful current from which she might never ever escape. Walking through the streets as dusk bled into night, Mia's thoughts were a raging storm. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, a cruel and tempting mantra. Comfort, stability, a new life. She knew the harsh reality of having nothing. The biting cold of the coming night was already beginning to seep into her thin jacket. It was a stark reminder that tomorrow would bring the same relentless struggle. The fight for food, the constant gnawing fear, the deep humiliation of being invisible to a world that rushed past her. She found a deserted park bench and sat down, staring up at the darkening starless sky. Her mother used to say that opportunity only knocks once. But at what cost, she wondered, hugging herself for warmth. To carry a child, to feel it grow inside her, to bond with it only to give it away. It was a monumental, unthinkable sacrifice. Yet what if this was her only chance, her only way to break the endless, crushing cycle of misery? Meanwhile, in his penthouse high above the city, Alexander sat in his living room. The city lights were a distant, indifferent backdrop. He was reviewing the contract his lawyers had meticulously prepared. He hated waiting. It was a form of losing control. But he was confident. He had calculated the risks, assessed the variables. If she declined, he would simply move on to the next candidate. It was, after all, just business. The sharp buzz of the intercom shattered his concentration. His assistant's calm voice informed him that a Miss Mia Vance had arrived. "Send her up," he replied, his own voice perfectly neutral. Minutes later, the private elevator doors opened, and Mia walked in. Her eyes were tired, shadowed with the weight of her decision, but they held a new, steely determination. "I accept," she said bluntly before he could even speak. He stood observing her carefully. There was no hesitation in her expression now, only a firm, grim resolve. "Excellent," he said. "Let's make this official." He gestured for her to sit, picking up the thick contract from the polished table. Mia read the document. Her eyes scanned the cold, precise legal terms that would now define her existence. The conditions were crystal clear. She would be housed, fed, and cared for throughout the pregnancy. All expenses paid. In the end, she would receive a life-altering sum of money. In return, she would relinquish all parental rights to the child. Forever. "This seems so final," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. The words on the page felt like chains. "That is exactly what I want," Alexander replied, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "And I trust it's what you want too." Mia took a deep, shuddering breath. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, she hesitated. Then she picked up the heavy, expensive pen. With a single, swift motion, she signed her name. The ink sealed the agreement, a dark, permanent mark that would change both of their lives forever. The signing of the contract was an ending. It marked the end of Mia Vance's old life. But it was also a beginning. That very same day, she was escorted by Evelyn Alexander's poised and professional assistant to a black sedan waiting at the building's entrance. As she looked out the window, the city that had once felt so hostile now seemed to hold a flicker of strange, terrifying promise. Mia said little during the ride to Alexander's penthouse. Evelyn, sensing her unease, tried to break the silence. "You'll like the residence. It's quiet, spacious, and most importantly, very comfortable." The assistant's friendly tone was a stark, jarring contrast to the cold, impersonal contract Mia had just signed. She simply nodded her mind, still trying to process the dizzying whirlwind of the last 24 hours. When the car arrived at the penthouse building, her eyes widened. It was an icon of modern architecture, a monument of glass and steel that screamed wealth and power. Evelyn led her inside, and Mia was immediately overwhelmed by the sheer opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings. A sweeping marble staircase looked like something out of a palace. The furniture was minimalist but clearly priceless. Each object was placed with a cold, calculated precision. She felt profoundly out of place, a weed in a meticulously manicured garden. This was not her world. But for the next 9 months, it would be her gilded cage. "I'll show you to your room," Evelyn said with a practiced, professional smile. "It's one of the best suites in the house." Mia followed in a daze. The room was breathtaking. There was a huge bed with impossibly soft linens. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the city. The ensuite bathroom was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. "If you need anything at all, just call me," Evelyn added, her voice kind but distant. "We're here to take care of you." Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Mia was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the smooth, cool fabric of the duvet. It was surreal. Utterly surreal. Just yesterday, she was preparing to sleep on cold pavement. Now she was surrounded by a level of luxury she couldn't have even imagined. But no matter how comfortable it was, a heavy weight settled in the air. She wasn't a guest here. She was a vessel. She was part of a business deal. In the days that followed, Mia settled into a new, strange routine. Meals were served at precise times. A team of doctors was brought in for a battery of initial examinations. As expected, Alexander kept his distance. He was a ghost in his own home, consumed by his work. She rarely saw him, except for the moments he would briefly appear to review the daily reports Evelyn provided on her progress. He was monitoring his investment. On one of those rare occasions, they crossed paths in the long, silent hallway. Mia was returning from a medical checkup when she saw him striding toward her. His posture was, as always, impeccable. His expression, as always, was serious and unreadable. "Are you well?" he asked. His tone was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth. It was the question a CEO might ask about a critical project. Mia hesitated. "Everything is as expected, I suppose." He gave a short, curt nod, not pressing for more. But before he walked away, he gave her one last lingering look. "If you need anything, ask Evelyn. I want you to be well." She didn't know what to make of that. Was it a flicker of genuine human kindness, or just a shrewd businessman ensuring the terms of his investment were being protected? Either way, the brief, sterile encounter lingered in her mind for hours. Although she was being treated like a queen, Mia couldn't escape the internal turmoil that began to brew within her. The loneliness in the vast penthouse was a crushing weight. One night, unable to sleep, she walked out onto the balcony of her suite. She looked over the vast, illuminated garden terrace below. The air was cool and crisp against her skin. "Am I doing the right thing?" she whispered to the indifferent city. The idea of carrying a child, of feeling life, grow inside her, only to give it away, felt more complex and more painful with each passing day. The contract was clear. Her mind understood the terms, but her heart was beginning to rebel. Meanwhile, from his office on another floor, Alexander watched everything from a distance. He knew Mia was resilient. He had seen it in her eyes on that first day, but he also saw the emotional weight she carried. He saw it in the way she wandered the empty halls, in the sad, lost look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Despite his cold, calculated demeanor, a faint flicker of curiosity sparked within him. Who was this woman who had accepted such an unorthodox, almost inhuman proposal, and why couldn't he shake the unsettling feeling that she was becoming more than just a component in his meticulously crafted plan? One evening, Mia was in the Grand Library. She was browsing through a shelf of leather-bound books she had no intention of reading. The quiet of the house and the scent of old paper were comforting a small solace in her sterile existence. Alexander entered, surprising her. He seemed preoccupied, holding a folder of documents. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said, stopping in the middle of the vast room. "I didn't expect you to talk to me," she replied, a hint of her old, defiant sarcasm slipping through. He frowned, but didn't retort immediately. Instead, he placed the folder on a table and sat in a nearby armchair, the leather sighing under his weight. "Are you settling in?" he asked. "I think so," she answered, her voice hesitant. "But it still feels strange. None of this feels real." Alexander leaned forward slightly, his posture becoming more intense. "It doesn't have to feel real. This is a contract, Mia, an agreement. I assure you everything will be executed exactly as planned." "That's what you do, isn't it?" she said, a note of challenge in her voice. "Plan everything, calculate everything, leave no room for error." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to engage in this conversation. "That is how I've built everything I own," he finally replied, his voice flat. "Planning prevents failure." Mia gave a short, sad laugh, shaking her head. "Sometimes failure is inevitable. You can plan for every possible outcome, Alexander, but you can't plan for how you feel. You can't control it." Her words seemed to strike a nerve. He leaned back in the chair, his face a mask of controlled indifference, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. He said nothing. Mia noticed his reaction, but she didn't push. She simply returned the book to its shelf and headed to her room, leaving him alone with his thoughts in the cavernous, silent library. The days melted into weeks. The weeks began to feel like months. Mia started to adapt to the strange, isolated rhythm of life in Alexander Sterling's penthouse. Yet despite the undeniable material comfort she couldn't shake, the profound feeling of being an outsider. At night, alone in her opulent room, her thoughts inevitably drifted to the child or children she was now carrying. She tried to maintain an emotional distance. She would repeat the words of the contract to herself like a mantra. This is a transaction. This is not my child. But the feeling haunted her in the quiet, lonely hours before dawn. While Mia grappled with her internal conflict, Alexander found himself watching her from afar. He was a man who prided himself on focus, on discipline. But amidst his high-stakes meetings and relentless schedule, he would catch himself thinking about her. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was a persistent, nagging curiosity he couldn't quite explain or dismiss. One afternoon, returning home earlier than usual, he found Mia in the rooftop garden. She was sitting on a bench, her face tilted towards the sky, a serene expression on her face. It was a look that contrasted sharply with the tough, defiant woman he'd first met on the street. He hesitated for a moment, an unfamiliar feeling for him. Then he walked over. "Enjoying the garden?" he asked, his tone typically direct. Mia turned slightly startled. "It's nice," she replied. "Definitely better than the streets." He sat beside her, maintaining a careful, deliberate distance. There was something disarmingly honest about her that always seemed to catch him off guard. "Are you settling in?" he asked again. Mia shrugged, her gaze drifting to the vibrant flowers lining the path. "It still feels like I'm living someone else's life." Alexander was silent for a moment. "It's all part of the agreement," he finally said. "I want you to have everything you need so that things proceed as planned." "As planned?" she echoed, a hint of quiet irony in her voice. She turned to look at him. "Do you always live like this? Planning every single second of your life?" He was taken aback by the directness of the question. He was accustomed to people who agreed with him, who deferred to him, not challenged him. "Planning is what keeps my empire running," he stated firmly. "Without it, everything falls apart." Mia gave a faint, sad smile. "I don't think everything can be controlled. I don't think it's supposed to be. Sometimes things just happen whether you want them to or not." Her words unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He stood up abruptly, the conversation suddenly feeling too personal, too close. "If you need anything, let Evelyn know," he said, his voice clipped and formal once more. He turned and headed back inside, leaving her alone in the garden. A few days later, Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself. He decided to accompany Mia to one of her medical appointments. He told himself it was simply to ensure his investment was secure, to get a first-hand report. But deep down, he knew a budding, unfamiliar sense of responsibility was taking root. At the clinic, after the routine examinations, the doctor turned on a machine. And for the first time, they heard it. The baby's heartbeat. It was a strong, steady, rhythmic sound that filled the small, sterile room. Thump, 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 thump. Mia felt an unexpected wave of pure emotion crash over her. Her eyes instantly filled with tears, which she quickly, angrily tried to hide. Alexander, on the other hand, stood perfectly still. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. But something in his gaze shifted. It was as if that simple, powerful sound had breached a wall inside him he never even knew existed. "Everything looks perfect," the doctor said, smiling, oblivious to the emotional earthquake happening in the room. On the way back to the penthouse, the silence in the car was different. It wasn't cold or empty. It was heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts and feelings. When they arrived, he opened the car door for her. It was a simple gesture, but it felt significant. "Thank you for today," Mia said softly as she got out. "It was the least I could do," he replied, his gaze fixed on some distant point over her shoulder. "I'll ensure everything continues to go well." In the following days, Mia began to notice small, almost imperceptible changes. Alexander started appearing more frequently in the common areas. Their conversations, though still brief, felt less like business dealings. He asked about the specific details of her appointments. He asked how she was feeling. One evening, as they were having dinner in the vast, silent dining room, he broke the unspoken rule of keeping things impersonal. "Have you thought about what you want to do after this is over?" Mia was startled by the question. I don't have any plans. I don't know what my life will be like." Alexander nodded slowly, seeming to genuinely consider her answer. "You will have the resources to start over anywhere you choose. Just make sure you do something worthwhile with it." Behind his calculated, pragmatic words, she sensed a trace of something else, something that felt almost like concern. She didn't know how to interpret it, but for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone in the vast, empty penthouse. One morning, she found a package outside her door. It was wrapped impeccably. Inside was a new high-quality sketchbook and a set of professional-grade pencils. There was a small handwritten note in his sharp, decisive handwriting. "To help with your free time." She was speechless. She had casually mentioned her love for drawing only once weeks ago during their very first conversation. She never imagined he would remember, let alone act on it. That night, as she was sketching in the garden, he passed by and stopped. "Did you like the gift?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Yes," she replied, holding the sketchbook protectively. "Thank you. I didn't expect it." Alexander almost shrugged a gesture of dismissal, but stopped himself. "It seemed like something that could be good for you." Mia smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "It was," she said simply. She began to realize that beneath the layers of control and cold logic, there was a man she didn't know at all. And while she tried to keep her distance to protect her own heart, a part of her wanted to understand him. At the same time, Alexander was grappling with unfamiliar, unwelcome emotions. He had entered this agreement for simplicity and control, but Mia was proving to be anything but simple, and that more than anything terrified him. The following week, it was time for the ultrasound. Mia woke feeling a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. She found Alexander waiting for her downstairs. "I'll go with you," he stated. It was not a question. At the doctor's office, the physician moved the transducer over her abdomen. The grainy black and white image on the screen was mesmerizing. A tiny flickering shape. Life. And then the sound came again. The strong, steady rhythm of heartbeats. Not just one, but two, a rapid, overlapping beat. "Well," the doctor announced, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Here's a surprise we couldn't see last time. It seems you're expecting twins." Mia's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. Twins. The possibility had never even crossed her mind. A wave of powerful emotion, shock, joy, and a touch of raw fear washed over her. Alexander, for his part, was silent for a long, stunned moment. His stern, controlled expression dissolved completely, replaced by something Mia had never seen before, genuine, unguarded awe. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes transfixed. "Two," he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it. 2, the doctor confirmed with a happy smile. Both appear perfectly healthy and are growing well. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of 2 tiny hearts beating in perfect, miraculous unison. For Mia, that moment was magical. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't deny the profound, overwhelming connection she felt to the 2 lives growing inside her. Let's play another game with our dedicated viewers. Type pizza in the comments below. Only those who have made it this far will know the secret code. Now let's continue the story. Alexander seemed equally moved. His eyes, usually so guarded and calculating, now revealed a deep vulnerability that words could not express. For the first time, he wasn't just a businessman securing an heir. He was a man on the verge of becoming a father. To 2 children. On the way back to the penthouse, the silence in the car was different. It was no longer cold or heavy. It was a silence filled with a shared, unspoken wonder. "You don't seem like the kind of person who gets easily surprised," Mia finally commented, her voice soft. Alexander let out a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I'm not. But this is different." "Is it scary?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He glanced at her, a flicker of unguarded emotion crossing his face. "No," he said, surprising her. "It's impressive, overwhelming, knowing that in a few months 2 completely new beings will be here, and they will be depending on me." Mia felt a sharp pang of pain and love in her chest. "They also depend on me," she said, her voice soft but firm. "At least for now." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know, and that's why I want to make sure you're okay, Mia. Not just physically. In every way. That's important to me." It was the most sincere, the most human thing he had ever said to her. That night he found her on the terrace, gazing out at the city lights. "I can't stop thinking about what the doctor said today," he confessed, sitting beside her. 2 babies, 2 futures. This is the first time I feel like something in my life can't be calculated. I can't plan who they'll become. I can't control it. Mia felt a chill run down her spine. It was a rare, shocking admission of his own limits. "Sometimes," she said softly, "that can be a good thing. Not knowing what's next. It can bring you things you never could have imagined." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, as if considering her words and her for the very first time. In the days that followed, the news of the twins brought an unexpected lightness to the sterile, silent penthouse. Evelyn, with a genuine smile, began preparing a nursery for 2. Mia watched the transformation with a complex mix of joy and deep, aching heartache. She knew with a certainty that terrified her that giving them up would be far harder than she had ever imagined. The contract that had brought them together, once so clear and simple, was becoming something far more complicated. And the twins, not yet even born, were already reshaping their lives in ways neither of them had ever foreseen. The revelation of the twins continued to shift the very ground beneath Mia and Alexander's feet. The small, uncharacteristic gestures from him began to pile up, becoming less of an anomaly and more of a new normal. He started joining her for meals, not just occupying the same vast dining room, but engaging in quiet, tentative conversation. One afternoon, he found her in the living room, staring blankly at a television screen. He sat in the armchair opposite her, his expression unusually open. "I know you still don't trust me," he began, the words startling her out of her reverie. "And I don't blame you for it. I've had experiences in my past. They taught me not to let anyone get close enough to hurt me. But with you, with them, I'm realizing I might have been wrong." Mia listened, stunned by his raw honesty. It was a crack in the armor she never thought she'd see. "We all have our barriers, Alexander," she said softly. "Perhaps you're right." He conceded, the words seeming foreign on his tongue. "But changing, it isn't easy for me." "No one said it would be," she replied with a small, encouraging smile. Their walks in the garden became a regular, cherished occurrence. One evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of purple, he surprised her by asking, "Have you thought about names?" She looked at him, surprised. I thought that was something you'd want to decide on your own." "I think it would be fair," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "if we did it together." She was beginning to see that he was genuinely trying. He was fighting against a lifetime of habit, a fortress of solitude he had built around himself. As the sun finally set, casting a warm, golden glow over the city, they sat on a bench in comfortable silence for a while. "I never imagined I'd be here," Mia said, her voice almost a whisper to herself. "Neither did I." Alexander responded, a faint, unpracticed smile touching his lips. "But maybe this is exactly where we need to be." The morning of the delivery started like any other. But just before lunch, Mia felt a sharp, sudden pain. It was different. It was intense. It seized her and took her breath away. She tried to ignore it, but it came again, stronger this time. Alarmed, she called for Evelyn, who immediately understood. "This could be it," she said, her voice calm but urgent as she rushed to find Alexander. He appeared in the room within seconds. His usual impassive mask was gone, replaced by raw, genuine concern that was plain to see on his face. "Mia, what's happening? I think the babies are coming." She gasped, another wave of pain washing over her. For a split second, Alexander froze. He looked utterly terrified. Then his CEO instincts kicked in, overriding the fear. He barked orders into his phone, summoning the driver, instructing Evelyn, organizing their departure with ruthless, life-saving efficiency. The ride to the hospital was a blur. He sat beside Mia, his hand gripping hers, a silent, steady anchor in her sea of pain. "We're almost there," he repeated, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. "You'll be okay. We'll be okay." At the hospital, a medical team was waiting. He stayed by her side, refusing to leave the delivery room for even a second. "I'm staying," he told the staff, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few hours, Alexander witnessed the raw, primal power of childbirth. He saw a strength in Mia he had never imagined. Finally, the first cry filled the room. It was a sound so small, yet so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundations of his world. "A boy," the doctor announced. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Before Alexander could even process the overwhelming emotion, a second, distinct cry joined the first. A girl. His daughter. Exhausted but radiant, Mia looked at the two tiny, perfect babies being gently cleaned. She wanted to hold them, to never let them go, but she knew this moment was fleeting. Alexander stood frozen for a beat. Then he stepped closer to Mia, took her hand, and his voice was thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "You were incredible," he whispered. "Thank you." Silent tears streamed down Mia's face. They were tears of joy, of relief, and of the heartbreaking knowledge of what was supposed to come next. When the babies were placed in her arms, she held them close, memorizing every perfect detail. Their tiny fingers, their soft tufts of hair. It was a love so overwhelming, so absolute, she knew a part of her would be leaving with them forever. When Alexander held his son for the first time, his hardened, cynical expression melted away completely. This wasn't an heir. This wasn't a legacy. This was his son. This was a bond he had never allowed himself to feel. When he held his daughter, he closed his eyes as if to imprint the precious moment in his memory forever. He looked at Mia, and in his eyes she saw something she never thought possible, pure, unadulterated gratitude. "They're perfect," he whispered. That night while Mia rested, Alexander sat by the incubators in the nursery, watching his children sleep. These tiny, fragile beings were not part of a plan. They were his connection to something greater, something real, true love. When he returned to Mia's room, carrying both babies carefully in his arms, he looked like a different man, a changed man. "I don't know how," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion as he gently handed her their son, "but this changes everything." Mia nodded, tears in her eyes, knowing that no matter what came next, this moment was a miracle she would never, ever forget. Months later, a heavy, suffocating silence hung in the penthouse. The day had come. The weeks following the twins' birth had been a blur of joy and deep underlying anguish. Mia loved them more than she ever thought possible. But the contract was always there, a dark shadow looming over every precious moment. Her time was up. Today was the day she was supposed to leave. As she packed her few belongings into a small suitcase, she glanced at the twins' cribs. They were sleeping peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Tears threatened to fall, but she fiercely blinked them back. She refused to let her last memories here be marked by weakness. She had signed the agreement. She had to honor it. When she came downstairs, suitcase in hand, she found Alexander waiting in the grand foyer. The cold, calculating man she had met was gone. In his place stood someone who looked vulnerable, someone who looked like he was about to lose everything that mattered. "Are you really leaving?" he asked, his voice low, strained. Mia's heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but she held her ground. "That was the deal, Alexander. I've done my part. Now it's time for me to move on." He stood still for a long moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his tailored coat and pulled out the original contract. He held the document between his fingers, as if it were poison. "This contract," he began, his voice steadier, now filled with a new resolve. "It should never have defined what is happening between us." Before Mia could respond, he tore the paper in half, then in quarters. He let the shredded pieces flutter to the cold marble floor. "I don't want you to go, Mia," he said, his eyes pleading with her. "I don't want this to end." Mia froze, her gaze fixed on the scattered pieces of her former life on the floor. Her heart was racing. "You can't just tear up a piece of paper and expect everything to change," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not simple," he said, taking a step closer to her. "Nothing about this has been simple. But these past few months, they've shown me something. I need you, Mia. Not just because of the twins. I need you because you brought something into my life I didn't even know was missing." "How do I know this is real?" she cried, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. "I've spent my whole life being discarded, being ignored. How can I believe you won't do the same thing when this gets hard?" He was so close now she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the genuine pain in his eyes. "Because you changed me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to prove it to you, Mia, but I am willing to spend every single day for the rest of my life trying, if you'll just give me the chance." His words shattered her remaining defenses. "What if it doesn't work out?" she asked, her voice choked with tears and fear. He took her hands in his. They were warm and strong. "Then we'll try again. And again, I will never give up on you, Mia, never. The world seemed to stop. Her doubts, her fears began to recede, replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope. She looked at him, truly, looked at him, and saw a man willing to let go of a lifetime of control, a lifetime of barriers just to be with her. Finally, she nodded, letting the tears fall freely now. They were tears of release. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." He let out a shuddering breath of pure relief and pulled her into a fierce, protective embrace. And for the very first time, Mia felt that she was truly, finally home. The months that followed were a journey of building a real family from the most unlikely of beginnings. Alexander Clumsy at first became a devoted hands-on father. He learned to change diapers. He mastered the art of warming a bottle. He even sang off-key lullabies until the twins fell asleep in his arms. Their home, once a sterile showcase of wealth, was now filled with the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of children. It was filled with laughter, with cries, and with a deep, abiding love that had grown against all odds. One evening, an intimate wedding ceremony was held in the mansion's gardens. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, they didn't promise a perfect life. They promised to always try, to always trust, and to always stand by each other, no matter what. Years later, on a sunny afternoon, Alexander and Mia sat in that same garden. They watched their twins, now toddlers, chase butterflies across the lush green lawn. The sound of their joyous, infectious laughter filled the air. "Are you happy?" Mia asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. He looked from his precious children to his beloved wife, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering love he never thought he was capable of feeling. "I never knew I could be this happy," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You gave me more than an heir, Mia. You gave me everything." As they shared a gentle, loving kiss, their children ran to them, babbling "Mama" and "Dada," wrapping their little arms around them in a group hug. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was real. It was built on love, on forgiveness, and on the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of a family. And that was a legacy far greater than any contract could ever define. What did you think of Alexander's transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And how would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. And don't forget to check out more touching tales right here on the end screen.